I hope each of you are doing very well today. I want to share with you some thoughts on the North American Mission Board today. I'm not going back into a whole lot of the history of it, but needless to say, things change and they change rapidly when it comes to missions and the culture in which we live. The North American Mission Board exists to work with churches, associations, and state conventions in mobilizing Southern Baptists as a missional force to impact North America with the gospel of Jesus Christ through evangelism and church planting. We accomplish that through what is called Send North America. What is Send North America? It's a church planting strategy of the North American Mission Board, and it's got several designs. One is to mobilize churches, to plant churches and mobilize church planters. Pardon me, I need to mute my telephone. The second one is to equip church planters and sending churches to be evangelistic church plants. To plant churches within a defined region and concentrate in large population centers or cities within those regions that would maximize the efforts to reduce the lostness, create a ripple effect that hopefully will move from the large cities to the rural areas. If you were to study when Paul would often go into a city, the idea was to plant churches within those cities, and the people passing through those cities would become Christians many times and take the gospel back to where they lived. That's kind of the model that the North American Mission Board is looking at. One of the reasons behind the change in this when Dr. Ezel became the president has to do with the fact that in the culture we live in, with finances sometimes restricted because we don't have all the money to do everything we would like to do, even though we know God has everything, we begin to have to make some tough decisions. And so they did make a lot of difficult choices, difficult decisions to primarily begin focusing on planting churches in large cities. In the past, we had had some success, some failure. They've changed a lot of the models. They're working hard to improve that. And so I encourage you to pray with them and to follow with me as we go through this. And if you have questions, I may not be able to answer them, but I would submit those to the North American Mission Board. And when I've submitted questions, they've been real good to try to answer them for me. The question sometimes comes up, why do you need new churches? Statistics show that new churches will grow faster and reach and baptize more people than established churches. Now let me state why I believe that that's probably true. The established church sometimes gets settled within the tradition of what they're doing, and the thing that every church plant has to guard against, you're going to reach certain plateaus. And it's not about the numerical plateau as it is as much the spiritual plateau. If you have a couple of hundred folks, you're still going to struggle some. But if you have somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 500 faithful attenders that actually tithe and give their offerings, you're going to be able to do most anything you want to do for the cause of Christ financially. Numerically, you've got enough people to draw from that you can do a lot with missions, outreach, discipleship. But there's one thing that happens within that dynamic. You know everybody if you try. It may be a little more difficult than with 50 people, but you can get to know everyone in that 300 to 500 range. People can be assimilated into that. When you move to that next level, 750, 1,000, you're going to start losing some of that, and it's one reason discipleship and small groups are so vital and important. And if you don't start those in the beginning, it's hard to start them at that point. And so it's important to understand that the established church sometimes becomes stale and stagnant. And a lot of that has to do with we pastors who need to keep casting a vision that you don't quit, that you don't stop. Now, every church will be somewhat limited in some areas, not necessarily in all areas, and there's some that are very much the same, but churches are sometimes limited depending on geographical location, depending on where they're at and what they're able to do. Now, this doesn't mean that NAMB's neglecting established churches, but it does mean that they're trying to strengthen them and encourage them to get actively involved in being a part of starting churches. So there's a number of ways to do this. They divide it into the regional approach, and the primary purpose of that was so NAMB can be more responsive to the differences in each area across North America. I have pastored in 3 states. And when you're in North Carolina, you can pastor in the mountains. You can pastor in an area that's not so mountainous. In South Carolina, it's pretty much the same way. Every church is similar in some ways because people are people, but every church is unique and different. And so if you go to certain regions, people think different. They have different customs. They have different things they do. And I've discovered that just within being a couple hours apart in some situations, how different churches are. There are some churches that may be 10, 20, 30 years behind in some areas. There are other churches 30 minutes to an hour from that church that may be light years ahead in certain areas. And I have pastored in those situations, so I'm not just speaking off the cuff there. And I've experienced and seen that. So it's not of neglecting, but it's having the regional approach to try to get the more traditional church, the more established church, to get involved in what the early church did, start churches. The national strategy implemented through a regional approach will help to identify the unique needs for evangelistic church planting within each region. And they take into account certain things, the cost of living, the geographical challenges, and the spiritual realities that may exist there. The regions are the Northeast, the South, the Midwest, the West, and Canada. Now those pretty much let you know the areas in which we're working at. States placed in those specific regions in consultation with the executive leaders of the state convention. And one thing NAMB's done with this, it draws the state convention in more perhaps than any other time in my lifetime as a pastor anyway. How will the regional approach be led? Well, each region's vice president will work with advisory groups in that region to accomplish the goals and objectives. There'll be a regional office located in each region. That meant not that they added expense, they cut back in some other areas. Leaders from each state Baptist convention within a specific region will give input, assist, as he steers the resources to each of those areas to establish those churches. Now, this model will help us keep a consistent strategy across North America to help us implement in a way that's best on a local level. Therefore, it's seen more locally. You understand more of what to expect there. I'm not going to name the area or the time, but a number of years ago, there was a lot of money poured into a specific area. We felt like there was a tremendous need in those areas for churches. And yet, out of, I think, 80-something churches that were attempted to start, only one survived today. And we're talking about 30 years ago, probably. And I don't want to be too specific because I don't want to put down or it's not an attack. I just mean that's a fact. So here is a new way of seeking to try to do this and do it better. One question a lot of people have is, will a church plant be required to support the cooperative program? Any church planted through NAMB's Send North American strategy will be a cooperative. That means a participating church. And any church sending will be as well. Now, churches that participate on a lesser level will not have such a requirement, but our hope is that churches who backed away from the cooperative program will be encouraged to get more involved and refocus their giving. We also have Send Help, Send Hope, Send Relief. Jesus shared in his earthly ministry and his mission statement, basically in Luke 19:10, when he said, "For the Son of Man is come to seek and save that which is lost." That's the same mission that the North American Mission Board embraces as we seek to help churches reach North America for Jesus Christ. Helping Southern Baptist churches and individuals introduce more people to Jesus is the top priority, and it's woven through everything that is attempted to be done. The North American strategy here is designed to help Southern Baptists push back lostness by prioritizing the planting of new evangelistic churches, especially in unreached and underdeserved areas. Now, one of the things that's happening today is there's a lot of people groups in America. They come from various parts of the world. And sometimes NAMB church planners struggle with how do you deal with this particular people group. So a partnership developed with IMB and NAMB to be able to let IMB help teach and train some people in these areas of how to better deal with certain people groups. And so we hope and pray that that will help out in a lot of this church planning. The leadership is under Kevin Ezell. He's a president of North American Mission Board. His job's pretty much providing strategic vision, direction, leadership as NAMB works with Southern Baptists to help send the hope of the gospel to North America. Send Relief responds to these areas that I've listed here, plus some others: poverty, human trafficking, refugees, children in crisis. The needs are enormous. In addition, fighting for freedom, crisis, or disaster relief. And you may see how these are done by reading the PDF file on NAMB. When issues are close to home, you want to help, but how? Through Send Relief, NAMB's focus on compassion ministry, you can meet a need, you can build a relationship, and you can be God's vessel to change a life. The Annie Armstrong Easter offering is the offering that is used each year during Easter time. There's not a specific date, although their WMU has a week of prayer. They will set that every year, and it's around Easter. But I pastored churches. We would take it early, take it later. We would get it to them, and always participated in this. This helps in North America. This is equivalent to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering for international missions that we do at Christmas time. Now, the North American Mission Resources categories fall pretty much into this: Annie Armstrong Easter offering, apologetics, chaplaincy. In apologetics, if you're looking for information to help with a particular cult, many times they will have that. Chaplaincy programs, church planner care, church planting, compassion ministries. They've added COVID-19, evangelism, future church planners, mission education, pastor and church leadership, planters' wives, church planters' wives, portrait of a neighborhood, prayer, replanting. The replanting is the taking a church that's dying, replanting it. And sometimes there will be churches that will come in and partner with a church that's dying, send some folks over to rejuvenate and to help and be a part of that. Sometimes they end up staying. Sometimes they're there for 3 or 4 years. And so there's a lot of different ways that this can be done. We thank the Lord for all of those who are involved in this. I hope this gives you an idea a little bit of what NAMB does and what Southern Baptists are involved in.